What would you do? You're going to get tired of hearing me ask that question by the time I'm finished telling this story, but it's the question we need to ask ourselves over and over if we are ever going to have any hope of understanding how the immigration of a few thousand Jews to a lightly developed area of the Eastern Mediterranean in the late 1800s has grown into the most bitter and intractable conflict in the world today. Any fight that goes on this long suffers from a lack of empathy, with the list of grievances so long on both sides that you're going to find plenty of reasons to hate whoever you want to hate, if that's what you're looking for.
This is problematic. Okay, who are you? Maryr Made on Tom Woods' show. We just had this.
Well,
now,
not
can
only
I ask
that,
you, what's your background?
I was an engineer for the Department of Defense for 20 years. I was served some time in the military, and then I was an electrical engineer for the Department of Defense. So it's a good thing I'm not still working for them, because after last week, I would almost certainly have my security clearance pulled. So
That is just crazy. How long have you been doing the show?
I started in 2015. Yeah, I've always been a nerd with my nose in a book, my whole life since I was a kid. And it's just how I spent all my free time and as an adult as well. So, but I was, I was not teaching history at a university or something. I was going out, spending 8 to 10 months a year, usually overseas, working with U.S. forces and our allies on missile defense systems primarily.
So you have been doing this for a little while, and I'm just thinking about Dave Smith's experience, because he tells me that when he gets started, he went a couple of years getting no traction whatsoever. There's nothing. But he just kept at it. And eventually he did get traction. And of course, now he has completely off the charts traction. Was that like what happened for you?
Sort of, yeah. So, I have episodes that are 7 hours long, like some of them, right? Like I did a 7-episode, 32-hour long series on Jonestown.
Yeah. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to play some clips of his Maryr Made podcast. I went through, it's 30 hours, but it was really easy today because one of these, we'll actually start, before that, we're going to start talking about, I've got to do Hitler apologists right here.
Tucker praised this guy as like the greatest historian and scholar. He gave him a very soft interview where he didn't push back on any of this stuff. And I mocked that, and he got kind of upset about that and reached out to me. I'm like, I never called you a Nazi. I just said you went soft on a Hitler apologist.
That's one aspect, and then we're going to play one more clip here of Seth.
Just how evil Hitler was, because you're saying that this other guy who defended us against him
was
worse.
Right? Let me get a word in here, because there's also the issue of what's not being said, because you can suggest did he actually say anything that was sympathetic to Hitler? Well, some of it was what he didn't say. In that conversation, there was no mention of the Holocaust. There was no mention of Hitler's genocidal intentions in a conversation that was meant to determine who the chief villain of World War II was. No mention of those things. How's that justifiable?
With that in mind, we're going to go and play some clips. We're going to sit back and we're going to get an understanding, and you're going to be able to take into account whether you think this guy is a Nazi apologist or not, and then go from there. Maybe his history is completely wrong. Maybe it is wrong, and that is something that needs to be determined. Okay, that you can do that. Other people can do that, but I get a problem when immediately it's he's a Nazi. And then there's no conversation. You don't even have to debate. You don't have to talk about anything else. And why is it? Why is it that this particular issue is so problematic that you can't talk about?
I want you to close your eyes. Take a breath and imagine you're lying in your bed. It's maybe 3 a.m., your wife's sleeping next to you. You've had a long, exhausting day of work and you've got another one ahead of you, but you're a little anxious and having trouble sleeping. See, she's pregnant and you're excited about it, but you're also wondering how you're going to feed a third child. Work's been tough to come by lately because more and more employers aren't looking for people like you. In fact, your family's starting to get dirty looks in a neighborhood you've lived in for years. Your kids have begun to ask why people don't seem to like us as much anymore, and Your wife has to avoid certain streets because of the way some of the young men will shout at her and the other women. But just breathe. Try to relax. It was worse than this last year, and things calmed down then, and they'll calm down now, right? You listen for your wife's breathing. It's deep and even. She's asleep. You've always been the worrier, but the truth is she's got a better sense of these things than you do, and she's sleeping like a baby, right? So just go to sleep. As you close your eyes and...
I want you to close your eyes.
Whoops.
More and more employers aren't looking for people. She's asleep. You've always been the worrier, but the truth is she's got a better sense of these things than you do, and she's sleeping like a baby, right? So just go to sleep. As you close your eyes and turn over, you hear some glass break in the distance outside.
I've got to apologize. I was trying to speed it up, and when you do that in OBS, all it does is make it sound like a girl's talking. Okay, we'll continue from here.
So just go to sleep. As you close your eyes and turn over, you hear some glass break in the distance outside. You feel your body tense up, but you take a deep breath. It could have been anything. Then you begin to hear the voices. Shouting. Your wife reaches for your arm and pulls herself closer to you. Shouting's unmistakable now, and there are more crashes moving down the street in the direction of your house. You tell yourself this can't be happening, not here, but even as the thoughts form, you're already out of bed and moving to the window. And that's when you see them. Outside, you see a group of people surrounding your neighbor and beating him with clubs. His children are in the street. He's in his pajamas. Their faces, they seem crazed. Your wife is out of bed and going to the kids' room. They're awake and asking what's going on. They've noticed that things have been different, but you've tried to protect them. You haven't told them what's been happening to people like you all over the country. You get your family partly dressed, but you're starting to hear people outside your front door, and there's no more time to lose. You grab your 9-year-old son and your 6-year-old daughter. You hug your wife, and the 4 of you are out the back door into an alley just as the mob smashes your door in. You make your way through the back alleys, and as you're going through, occasionally you're catching glimpses through the houses of your friends and their families being assaulted by people with clubs and torches and kitchen implements. People are screaming, and you see blood, and there's fire and smoke. Houses are being burned. How is this happening? You recognize some of these attackers. They're people you see every day. These aren't strangers. People you buy groceries from, people you pass on the street who fix your roof and who you've done work for. You look into your kids' eyes and they're confused and terrified. Your wife's keeping it together. She believes you're going to protect her, but you're just trying to look strong. You have no idea where to go. You run around a corner and find yourself face to face with a big man in a police uniform. Begin to tell him about the commotion on the street, about the attacks and the fires and the looks in their eyes, and you keep talking to him as if he's a policeman, even as you realize that he's raising his club and bringing it down on your head, and now everything is dark. You awake some time later in the street, with your head ringing and lying in a pool of blood. The noise and pain wake you up. You squint through a film of blood and bleary eyes, and you see 4 men raping your wife. She's covered with blood, and she's badly beaten. It seems only half aware of what's happening to her. She looks in your direction. Your daughter is being held by the arms by 2 drunken men, and your son's lying at their feet in a bloody heap. You begin to realize that there are bodies everywhere. Your neighbors. 2 laughing teenagers step over a body as they come out of your house with the few valuables you had before setting fire to your home. You went to bed a few hours ago. This was just another day. You can see in your wife's eyes that some part of her still believes that you're going to save her. You struggle to find your balance, and you move toward her when a teacher from the local school steps behind you and crushes your skull with a hammer. Now, this isn't a scene from a horror movie or some singularly horrific event that occurred, that one time in humanity's dark past. If you were a Jewish person living in Europe or Russia for most of the last 1,000 years, this scene would have been pretty familiar to you, because it happened all the time. Now, I'm not trying to shock you, or maybe I am a bit, because I think sometimes we need to be shocked in order to take something we see in a newspaper or hear about from time to time in a history book and realize that it's not just a story. I spent a lot of time trying to decide whether or not to start with that story, whether to include anything like that, whether I was being just gratuitous or obscene, and I'm still not sure what the answer to that is. But in the end, I asked you to imagine yourself in an unimaginable situation, because this story has to begin there. I think it has to begin there. What I just described happened to real people who felt and feared and loved and suffered and grieved every bit as deeply as you or me. And so when we close our eyes and we imagine what it would be like to watch that happen to our families, I mean, you can't even imagine it, but just try to force yourself to understand that real people weren't imagining it. It happened to them, and they felt those things. Think of the people you love more than anything. And I know it's uncomfortable, but I'm asking you to do it, because only by imagining yourself in an unimaginable situation can we make sense of why people might take unimaginable measures to save or to avenge the people they love. They were called pogroms, and this kind of anti-Jewish violence sort of came in waves throughout European and Russian history. Times of uncertainty and turmoil tended to be bad news for European Jews in general, as the anxieties of the population always seemed to get taken out on people who had been designated either by the community or by themselves as set apart or different. Usually it's a little bit of both.
Okay, so look, in the chat, Mark's saying, this isn't fun anymore. I get it, okay? What I'm giving you is some context, because you just saw there's a 30-some million views of his interview with Tucker Carlson, okay? And a lot of people are coming out just bashing completely. And one of the things they say is he's a Nazi sympathizer. I don't know if they're saying a Holocaust denier, but definitely that's implied, okay? So I just want to give you some context here as to what is actually up with this dude. And we're going to play another one here. And I'm just going to keep going through these. We're going to play them on. This is Kill the Jews, Pogroms.
Well, hold on. It's like...
Whoops. That's not the one. That's not the one. Okay. So once again, I'm going to have to this is disturbing, because I thought I had this all taken care of. Thought I had it all taken care of. Okay. And here we go.
From 1903 to 1906, thousands and thousands would be killed in pogroms in Ukraine. In one attack in Crimea, over 2,500 were murdered in a single night, many more raped and maimed. After the first Kishinev pogrom, in April 1903, the New York Times wrote, quote, "The anti-Jewish riots in Kishinev, Bessarabia are worse than the censor will permit us to publish. There was a well-laid-out plan for the general massacre of Jews on the day following the Russian Easter. The mob was led by priests, and the general cry, 'Kill the Jews,' was taken up all over the city."
Okay. Once again, I'm just playing.
Now, after a series of riots and revolutions shook the Russian Empire in 1905, hundreds of pogroms followed. There was a bloodbath in Odessa, Ukraine. Robert Weinberg's written extensively on the labor unrest leading up to the revolution and how it supercharged tensions between the Jews and other subjects of the Russian Empire. You see, the Jews, encountering so much discrimination without having any legal recourse, they did what most people would do. They were attracted in great numbers to revolutionary movements. Who can blame them, given what they were dealing with? But the problem was that this often gave fuel to the fires that were already burning, because when riots and strikes and revolutions began to disrupt society, people often blamed the Jews for being behind it all. And so on October 19th, 1905, after a few days of street fights between left-wing Jewish students and workers' groups with Russian demonstrators, shots were fired at a crowd of Russians by a few Jewish revolutionaries. And then the city of Odessa went insane.
Okay. Living with pogroms.
That's horrifying. But the point to be aware of here is that this kind of thing was not exceptional. Over just a few years in the Russian Empire, one modern study found pogroms in 64 towns and cities and 626 small towns and villages. And I always have to fight the tendency to get just completely overwhelmed and numbed by the scale of it all. Because these pogroms, they're not happening to cities and towns and villages. They're happening to people. Those are real babies being torn to pieces, real mothers watching it happen, real fathers and brothers being killed in those dozens of towns and hundreds of villages. If you were a Jewish person living during these years, this was something that you lived with.
Okay, I just want to point out, so the Fear and Loathing in the New Jerusalem starts in the 1800s, moves all the way through till 1948, and then he does a kind of a recap from 48 to like 67. 30 hours of this. My point is, there's a lot of work that goes into, and this next clip is kind of going to be the seminal question for what happens during this for his podcast. One, you've got to understand the times, the people, what was taking place in Europe from before and after World War I. A lot of the pogroms especially in Russia, and then Ukraine, and then what happened in Germany, and how this drove the Zionist movement in a sense, right? Trying to get you out of Europe, we got to go to a place, and there's context to this all. Okay, what would
now? That's horrifying. But the point to be aware of here is that this kind of thing was not exceptional. Over just a few years in the Russian Empire, one modern study found pogroms in 64 towns and cities and 626 small towns and villages. And I always have to fight the tendency to get just completely overwhelmed and numbed by the scale of it all. Because these pogroms, they're not happening to cities and towns and villages. They're happening to people. Those are real babies being torn to pieces, real mothers watching it happen, real fathers and brothers being killed in those dozens of towns and hundreds of villages. If you were a Jewish person living during these years, this was something that you lived with.
I think we just played the same one.
Jabotinsky's still back in Poland trying to organize defense units to protect Jews from the multiplying pogroms and persecutions that are taking place in Eastern Europe. He's screaming at the top of his lungs that the Jews in Europe are living on the edge of a volcano. And he's screaming to the Zionist leadership in Palestine, there's no more time. We got to do something now. Something is happening in Europe. And you're not here, but it's different. It's not like the other times. We've got to get everyone the fuck out of here. In March 1938, Hitler had annexed Austria. And Austrian Jews came under attack by their former neighbors the next day. Pogroms were raging in Poland and Romania and most of the rest of Eastern Europe. And so at the urging of the United States, a conference was held in France to discuss possible options regarding what to do with Jewish people who wanted to flee. Mein Kampf, Hitler would later write, quote, "There followed terrible days and even worse nights. I knew that all was lost. In these nights, hatred grew in me. Hatred for those responsible for this deed," end quote. And those Hitler held most responsible for this deed were the Jews. He shared the view of many people in Europe and the United States that leftist revolutionary politics was dominated by Jews. And just a month before Hitler was discharged from the German army in March 1920, Winston Churchill had published that editorial, some of which I quoted earlier, called Zionism versus Bolshevism. He said that international Jews, this is Winston Churchill speaking. I know I've probably read this part in an earlier episode, but it's worth reading again. He said that the international Jews were engaged in, quote, "a worldwide conspiracy for the overthrow of civilization. There is no need to exaggerate the part played in the creation of Bolshevism and in the actual bringing about of the Russian Revolution by these international and, for the most part, atheistical Jews. It is certainly a very great one. It probably outweighs all others. With the notable exception of Lenin, the majority of the leading figures are Jews. Moreover, the principal inspiration in driving power comes from Jewish leaders. In the Soviet institutions, the predominance of Jews is even more astonishing, and the prominent, if not indeed principal, part in the system of terrorism applied by the Extraordinary Commission for Combating Counter-Revolution has been taken by Jews, and in some notable cases by Jewesses. The same evil prominence was obtained by Jews in the brief period of terror during which Bela Kun ruled Hungary. The same phenomenon has been present in Germany, especially in Bavaria, so far as this madness has been allowed to prey upon the temporary prostration of the German people. Although in all these countries there are many non-Jews every whit as bad as the worst of the Jewish revolutionaries, the part played by the latter in proportion to their numbers in the population is astonishing." End quote. Now Hitler could have written those words.
Yeah. Look, I'm not here to pronounce whether he is correct or not. This is the problem with history, which is if you get the facts right? And even then you can have some debates because it's often difficult. Hey, Churchill wasn't on TikTok. He wasn't on Instagram. He wasn't tweeting every day. We don't necessarily know all of the inner workings. Think about it. FDR, for a long time, no one knew that he was in a wheelchair, right? So you can hide things from everybody, and some historians will come out, but then is that the right narrative? So even with that in mind, you can have different interpretations of people, right? We like to, in our minds, make them, lionize these people or villainize these different people. So that to here is what the idea is, which is in revisionist history ideas, which is how do we interpret some of these things? And could have there been different outcomes? And that's a lot of what he's actually talking about. And what kills me is it seems to be that some of the people that we're going on about here, or at least the historians that are freaking out about everything, they seem to think that this outcome is the only outcome that could have happened, that should have happened. And that's not always the case. You don't know. Okay, we're almost done here. I'm playing some of these. This is, I don't know what you're...
Just as the Zionists came into the fullness of their strength, the clock ticked midnight. 3 months after the issuance of the white paper, Adolf Hitler moved against Poland, bringing almost 3 million Jews under his power. Instead of using their new strength to create a majority in Palestine out of Europe's Jews, in 6 years the Zionists would pick through the rubble and find that there weren't enough European Jews left. The news of Hitler's invasion broke while the 21st Zionist Congress was in session in Geneva. Arthur Rippon was there, and he said that the announcement exploded like a bomb over those assembled. In his final words to the Congress, on the last night, the evening of August 24th, 1939, Chaim Weizmann told the delegates, quote, "If, as I hope, we are spared in life and our work continues, who knows? Perhaps a new light will shine upon us from the thick black gloom. The remnant shall work on, live on, until the dawn of better days. Towards that dawn I greet you. May we meet again in peace." End quote. With tears in his eyes, weeping, Chaim Weizmann embraced his colleagues on the platform, and as he descended from the dais and made his way through the crowds out of the hall, every eye was full of tears. Every heart was already full of mourning, and hundreds of hands reached out for Dr. Weizmann as he went out into the darkness.
There you go. We're almost done here. Let's continue on.
Okay, so the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany invade Poland. France and Britain have a defensive...
This is kind of just given I think this is like episode 5. And by the way, episode 5 is like almost 6 hours. And then episode 6 is like 6 hours. So all these are long. This one gives an idea of, and I think this is his crux with Churchill.
Pact with Poland, so they declare war on Germany. although not on the Soviet Union, and after the war they allow the Soviet Union to seize Poland, commit mass murder against non-communists, and turn it into a Soviet police state, but whatever. It's another podcast. Get me started about communism. So now World War II is on. Okay? Shit is on. Whatever the revisionists had been planning with help from the Poles was done. That was over. The Polish state was destroyed completely within a few weeks, and the Polish army, along with thousands of faithful Beitar Zionists who were going to stick to their commitments, were pushed underground to carry on their fight as guerrillas and partisans.
And our last clip of Maryr Made here goes from episode 6, Nazi mass killings. And by the way, this is simply to set the stage that member Seth Dillon said it was a travesty. Matter of fact, we'll play that clip again, that Maryr Made is pretty much, Darryl Cooper is pretty much a Nazi sympathizer, or how do you even have this? Because, and matter of fact, that's what I'll show you some of his tweets. He thinks Darryl Cooper is a Nazi sympathizer. And if you listen, once again, when you listen to this podcast, this is why I'm playing this stuff. There's nothing in here where and maybe you guys are having a problem with saying, why is he not pushing back on a lot of this fake stuff that happened in World War II? That's not what he takes it for granted that this is the truth, and then works from there for this podcast series on the fear and loathing in the New Jerusalem. So here's the last one. We'll go from.
I'm going to let 3 people tell more personal stories.
Hang on.
And I hope that my intentions here will become clear as we go through them. This first passage that I'm going to read to you is from Timothy Snyder's shattering 2010 book, Bloodlands, Europe Between Hitler and Stalin. It's 1941, and you're in Ukraine. Ukraine, the same land that less than a decade before this had seen 6 to 10 million peasants murdered in Stalin's Holodomor. And so Snyder begins, quote, "In Kiev in September 1941, a further confrontation with the remnants of Soviet power provided the pretext for the next escalation. The first attempt to murder all of the native Jews present in a large city. Although most of the Jews of Kiev had fled before the Germans took the city, tens of thousands remained. They were all to be killed. A Wehrmacht propaganda crew printed broadsheet notices that ordered the Jews of Kiev to appear, on pain of death, at a street corner in a westerly neighborhood of the city. In what would become the standard lie of such mass shooting actions, the Jews were told that they were being resettled. They should thus bring along their documents, money, and valuables. On 29 September 1941, most of the remaining Jewish community of Kiev did indeed appear at the appointed location. Having surrendered their valuables and documents, people were forced to strip naked. Then they were driven by threats or shots fired overhead in groups of about 10 to the edge of a ravine known as Babi Yar. Many of them were beaten. Panicheva remembered that people were already bloody as they went to be shot. They had to lie down on their stomachs, on the corpses already beneath them, and wait for the shots to come from above and behind. Then would come the next group. Jews came and died for 36 hours. You know, it can be easy for 33,761 corpses to become numbing, especially when it happens over and over and over. But there's something about reading the diary of a young wife searching among corpses for days, hoping, if you can call it that, hoping to find her beloved husband. Something about that brings you back down into the mud. This was real. Oh, yeah, I know it was real. I read about it in school, or I have a Jewish friend with a grandparent, or maybe you're Jewish and you had a grandparent. No. This was real. Okay? Close your eyes and look around you at the field of bodies stacked. Smell them. And look at the distraught young wife flipping over rotting bodies, hoping, not hoping. What do you feel in this kind of a situation? See the distraught young wife flipping over rotting bodies in this field of corpses, one by one, hoping to find her faithful husband that she had married only 4 months before the German invasion. This was real.
And there you go. So pretty sobering stuff, honestly, and what we have to get through.